Hello quilt friends, welcome back to the Winter Wonder Sampler Sew Along. We are on our last week together, and what I'm going to share with you this week is I'm going to walk you through the steps that you need to know to be able to sew the mitten and the tree and the scarf sections to the center of your quilt. Then we're going to go through how to do the borders, and because this is a directional print, there's a few tricks for cutting, because we're going to cut some strips lengthwise and some strips crosswise, so we'll walk you through how that's done. And then last of all, I will show just a couple clips with a few ideas for how to machine quilt your quilt so that you can get it finished, or possibly a few ideas for you to share with a machine quilter if you have someone who's going to finish that for you. So stay tuned for those videos where I will walk you through these final steps. So I've got my pieces all laid out on the floor and we're ready to sew this together. So I'm going to show you how it's assembled because it's just a little bit different than typical. We are going to start with this border and then we're going to work our way around the quilt counterclockwise, attaching those pieces. So do you remember how one of the tree sections I had you leave it separated and the other ones up here, those are all sewn together? So you're going to take that separated one and you're going to sew it together with this cream sashing piece and one of the mitten units. Now, I mentioned earlier that if your center didn't turn out quite the right size or some of your sections turned out small or big, this little strip right here is where you're going to adjust. So if you ended up with your middle being, for example, a ½ inch too small, and this was a ½ inch too small, and that was a ½ inch too small, everything would fit. But if this is a ½ inch too small, and this turned out the right size, and this turned out the right size, you can take that ½ inch out of here so that this border section here fits the quilt there, if that makes sense. But hopefully you're pretty close to the right size and you can make it fit and make it work. So go ahead and sew those sections to the quilt. Then the scarf unit will go on the top. Then you have another little spacer right there that's going to go in between the trees and the mittens. And then you can sew this seam right here. And then you can attach the tree to the bottom of the scarf, and then that will fit along there, and then your top is done. So our next step is going to be to add the borders. So I'm going to go get that set up because there's a little trick in cutting the borders lengthwise that I want to go over with you. So I'll be back shortly. Okay, so I've got my border fabric laid out here, and this is a directional print, as you can see here from our little figures that are out in the snow in the little cabins. So there is going to be a little bit of a trick to cutting this, and depending on which version of the pattern you have, I'm going to assume that many of you have the Riley Blake's boxed kit, so your directions are going to look a little bit like this, or I should say a lot like that. They're going to be exactly like that. If you have just the single pattern from me, I have a different version here, just handling the yardage for the lengthwise cut pieces, because there's so many ways you can do it. So if you want the directional print to have the print going this way on the side borders, then you're going to need a length of 72 inches if you want it not pieced. Now for the Riley Blake kit, we didn't want to have to call for quite that much fabric because you end up with a ton of waste when you do that. So we called for 1.5 yards, which is what you have here, and we can still cut some pretty long lengthwise cut borders, and you'll just have one seam in the middle instead of it being one continuous piece. So I'm going to show you how that cutting is done, because typically we cut crosswise, which would be strips going this way, and you have your selvage going lengthwise that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our fabric, and I've got the lengthwise, like where the selvage is, between my fingers here, and I'm going to fold this in half along the selvage, and I'm going to fold in half again, keeping the selvage pretty close to lined up. And then I'm going to lay that down on my cutting mat. I'm going to grab my cutter, and what we're going to do is we're going to cut some strips here. So I'm just going to cut off the selvage, and you want to make sure that your ruler is laying square with the fold. So you can't just tip it on like this and cut. You need to have some of the lines, you know, for example, here's the edge of the ruler lined up with the fold there so that I know my strip is going to be straight. Then what you're gonna do is we are going to cut a couple 4.5-inch strips. If you'll see in the diagram in your pattern, that's this one for those doing the Riley Blake kit. There's a diagram there that shows you exactly how it's done. I've just done a little extra folding so it's easier to get my ruler on the piece. So when you open this up, do you see how you get a nice long piece with the print going the right direction? This will become the side borders. So you're gonna cut 2 of those, the full length of the fabric. Then what you're gonna do is open it back up, and then you're just going to refold it crosswise again. So this is exactly how it comes off the bolt. So here's the fold that goes on the bolt right here. You're gonna lay it out like that. You can see that I've got my 2 strips missing that I just cut. And you're just kind of gonna ignore that, and we're gonna cut just a few strips here that are a little less than the full width of the fabric because those pieces there are missing. So let's go ahead and cut 4.5-inch strips. And you can work your way across. And just let me show you. Now you can see the print is going this direction on this. So you're gonna go ahead and cut 5 of those, and then these can all be seamed together to make the top and bottom border. And when you're done cutting those, you're gonna cut 1 more strip lengthwise out of the scraps to get 1 more piece that's going this direction. So I'm just gonna keep cutting that, and you can watch me do that in case you have any questions on how that's done. Just make sure again that your ruler is staying square with the fold. And you'll do that until you have your 5 strips. Then you can open this up and see you've got enough that you can cut 1 more strip along the lengthwise here. And this just maximizes our fabric so we have as few of seams as possible. And that goes with those. And then you're going to have a piece that looks like this left over. So it's a pretty good sized piece. It would actually be enough to make a cute little pillow sham or something that you can store that quilt in. It's probably equal to a couple fat quarters. So I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to sew all these pieces together end to end, and then we'll be ready to put our borders on. Well, I hope that video was helpful for you on how I fold my fabric so that I can get my ruler on it for those lengthwise pieces. If you are struggling to follow that, you can always just look at the diagram in the pattern. I have the 44-inch width of fabric going this way and the 54 this way, and then you can just cut it as shown. Then what you're going to do is take your lengthwise strips and sew them together end to end, and you're going to cut off 2 border strips, 1 for each side of your quilt. Then take your crosswise strips and sew them together end to end, and then you're going to cut off 2 lengths for the top and bottom of the quilt. And there are measurements given in the pattern, but you're going to want to measure your own quilt and make sure they are that size. Otherwise, you need to make a few adjustments and cut your borders to fit your quilt. So once you get those borders sewn on, then you can watch the next part of the video where I talk a little bit about machine quilting ideas. And if you're wondering about a few hints for binding, my blog, ankustreasures.wordpress.com, has quite a few tutorials on binding. And then I'd highly encourage you to watch the binding tutorial that I have on YouTube, on my same channel that this video is posted to, where I walk you through how to do the hand stitching part. So that will help you get that part done much quicker and hopefully with less tangling and less problems. So thanks again for joining me. I hope that you had fun with this and that you got your quilt done and you're ready for the holidays. I know it looks like a beautiful fall day here in Minnesota, but yesterday morning we had frost, so that cold weather is coming, and you're going to need a few winter quilts to help decorate your house for the upcoming season, and hopefully the Winter Wonder Sampler will be one of them. So thanks again for sewing along, and have fun with the rest of your project.